Oh my god, you guys. So, I just saw Bohemian Rhapsody, and I'm watching this really cool slideshow on the stairs of the movie because there's no there's no movie poster for it. This looks really interesting. Vincent van Gogh. Van Gogh. Wow. Willem, look, and that's a Mandela effect in of itself. Willem Dafoe. Anyway, so I saw Bohemian Rhapsody, and also to look how big this screen is. Like, those are the stairs. Oh my god, look at that. That looks like a face, you guys. It's like the great, mighty, and powerful Oz. And now we have Nicole Kidman looking scared, all kinds of scared. I think because she knows she's just come on after the face of Oz. Anyway, so I finally saw Bohemian Rhapsody. It was amazing. I laughed, I cried again. I'm still kind of crying. But anyway, at Live Aid at the end, when Freddie Mercury's singing to raise money for Africa, and the guy who played Bob Geldof looked exactly like, well, not exactly like Bob Geldof, but wow. So many people in the band looked so similar to the way they did in real life. Anyway, Freddie Mercury's like losing his voice. Not to be a spoiler alert, but he finishes the song, "We Are the Champions," and he sings the "Of the World" part. And he puts his fist up in the air. And I'm like, yes. And everybody's crying and cheering, and it was so great. And so I don't know if Mandela effect video makers have been doing their jobs. And there's the Oz face again. It's so creepy. It looks like an alien face. It looks like the alien. That looks like Marilyn Manson. Jeez. It looks like the alien in Last Starfighter in that poster. Speaking of which. Anyway, so he says the "of the world" at the end. So what I was saying is, I don't know if it seems as though Mandela effect video makers have been doing their job and putting the "of the world" in the end of it and called him out on it, or if it's reality residue from Live Aid. I should probably look it up. In the meantime, feel free to look it up yourself and see if he sang that at Live Aid, or if... Wait, what was my third option? I don't know. Or if, okay, well, so Mandela effect video makers, reality residue, or if it's a switchback. What if it's a switchback? That could be so crazy. So, anyway, I give the movie 4 stars, 4 thumbs up. The AIDS part kills me. See, I was around in the 80s, and one thing I want to talk about without getting too serious, because it's Thanksgiving. Oh, I can't see the face as much now. Is that when it comes to homosexuality and the way truthers, a lot of I call them mainstream truthers, seem to be spinning the narrative about homosexuals and homosexuality as if, like, oh my god, society's about to come to an end and they're all to blame and they're evil because the elite are supporting them now. People forget that the AIDS virus, like, did a number on that population back in the 80s. And my friend, and before anybody who tells me I'm confabulating or manufacturing things, I had a friend who worked in an adult support center, and he said that men in certain rooms who were suffering so badly from AIDS would just be wailing. And it was a real thing, and it was really painful. So my whole take on this is that AIDS basically tried to kill them back in the 80s, and a lot of people posit that the AIDS virus was manufactured in a lab. If, in fact, it was a conspiracy, that was true, and I'm not saying it is, I don't know. If I did know, there would probably be a problem, because if I said I knew, then you shouldn't trust me. I'm saying that, in my observation, I read articles that have posited that the AIDS virus was manufactured in a lab, and it was specifically designed to kill that population or make them suffer. But either way, if it was a conspiracy, the elite had it all to gain, because either it would have wiped out that portion of the population and made an example of them as the oppressed slaves they were. That's what they were back in the 80s and before. They were the oppressed slaves of society, along with other minority groups, and they were made examples of. Whether the stigma on them was that they had AIDS, just like in certain cultural minorities, the stigma on them is that they're gangsta and poor and all that stuff. Those are the stigmas that are floated about by the mainstream media. So That's what they were before. They were the oppressed slaves who were made an example of. Now that middle America has accepted homosexuality, and I don't mean to put a bunch of shit on middle America, because a lot of middle Americans are way cool and accept a lot of things, but once middle America accepts something, then what the elite do is try and make money off of that minority group. And let's face it, the stereotype about gay men is that gay men have assets. You want to fall in line and go to bed financially with gay men, because a lot of them actually don't get married, contrary to popular belief. And this is coming from a gay friend that I talked to, and a lot of them have assets and holding. And so why wouldn't the elite want a piece of that? And why wouldn't the elite want to get in line with that faction of society? So what I'm saying is that in light of all that, they go from oppressed slaves to be made an example of to financial slaves to be used by the system. And that's my take on it. I think that civil rights in and of themselves are so good. I would not want to go back to the 60s, to the Don Draper days, where anybody could just pinch me on my ass and say, "Get me my coffee." Oh, and the other thing I was going to say too is that what I went back to about the AIDS virus, how the elite could stand to win either way, is that great. So they kill a bunch of gay men and people in general who are just being sexually free, make an example of them. And if the medical industrial complex does find a cure, then they make a ton of money off of that. So either way, it's a win-win for them. Okay, I just got kind of serious, but it's just something that I've been meaning to get off my chest. The fact of the matter is, I think the truther movement is pretty much dividing and conquering everybody but the 1% versus the 99%, which is what I thought. That was the truther movement that I grew up with. So I don't know what this business is today of us pointing fingers at every minority group we can, because I think they're all being scapegoated. And I think our priorities have shifted, and I wonder why. All right, that's about all. Peace out. So anyway, back to the mainstream truther channel, because I did want to kind of just elucidate what I meant about mainstream truther channels. And I sort of see it as a parallel between Archie Bunker and Maude. And for those of you who are not familiar with Archie Bunker and Maude, they were these two like pretty badass edgy sitcoms of the 70s. And Archie Bunker was just this churlish Jabba the Hutt type. He reminded me of Jabba the Hutt a little, although he wasn't that fat, but Jabba the Hutt type, just really unsophisticated, and yes, conservative. He didn't want anything to change. And he judged every minority. He was incredibly racist. He was incredibly homophobic. He was incredibly sexist. So he's one character. There's Archie Bunkers, and then there's Mods. And Mods are these like annoying, pretentious liberals who really aren't liberal at all. But they're what people call the politically correct liberals, the ones who are hypersensitive, the ones who just basically just overcompensate towards minorities and towards gay people to try and prove how righteous they are and how deep and compassionate and understanding they are. They're not. And that's what when I hear people bitching about liberalism, I feel like, oh my God, you guys are upset at all the mods, but most liberals are not the mods. Most liberals are sincere and being concerned and compassionate for their common man. But when I see things like celebrities just, we're having a child and we're not going to give it a gender, pretentious ass shit like that just has nothing to even do with reality. And frankly, to give you an example, I grew up in a very liberal town. And a lot of times there was a lot of political correctness that sort of encroached upon us, but it wasn't too bad. But I remember sitting around the dinner table with my mom and dad, and we heard this new term for disabled people called differently abled. And we all just kind of groaned and rolled our eyes, and this is back in the 80s. And it's like, you just call it what it is, whatever. I didn't roll my eyes as much. I thought it was kind of interesting, but my parents did. And my parents were total liberals. They're like, oh my God, seriously? And it never caught on. And from my experience, most really extremely politically correct stuff does not catch on. It's just pretentious. People do it for a while because they think they're being so enlightened. And then it doesn't catch on because, let's face it, most people just want to be real. At least I hope they do. So anyway, the way I see the Truther movement right now is a bunch of Archie bunkers, like just churlish. They pretend to be Christian, they're not. Like, oh, can we say Richie from Boston? Sorry. I know, it's terrible. I normally don't mention other channels, but I just don't understand why people are into him, especially because he's so disrespectful towards Christians, and yet he claims to be one. So anyway, I see it as a bunch of Archie bunkers railing against the mods of society when these are not the real people that make up society. But the way I figure it is this. So when you consider that Archie bunkers are really bad conservative and Maud is a really bad liberal, then what we need, who would be the best role model to base it on, would be a really good conservative and a really good liberal. So I tried to think of like what character or what person in history would be that, and the only thing I could come up with is Jesus, right? Whether you believe Jesus was a true person or not, whether he was a figure of literal history or whether he's a true person, I mean, I guess it doesn't really matter. Whether you believe he was real or not, he was the best of both worlds. I mean, you talk about financial responsibility, money changers, blah, blah, blah. And then he hung out with prostitutes and lepers. And I'm sure he'd hang out with gay people and gangsters too. And he healed lepers. And also, too, leprosy is way more contagious than AIDS is. So, in any case, that's the point I'm trying to make.